Hello and welcome to Polyglot Podcast. My name is Christian. I'm from Finland, so my native language is Finnish. And today we have Michael Cristiano from Canada.
Yeah.
And so today we are covering the following topics. So Michael's language background, how he learns languages, something about Canada, the languages of Canada, and overall the culture and everything. And yeah, so we let's start from who's Michael?
Uh, well, my name is Michael. I'm from Canada. I am a language learner. I am a teacher, and I'm a writer. I live in Southern Ontario, which is like Ontario is a province in Canada, and I'm in the southern part, the most populous area. I live in a smaller town near Toronto. Toronto's kind of the capital, big city. Um, yeah, I love languages. I've been studying languages for probably as long as I can remember having hobbies as a child. And I'm lucky enough now to be able to do a couple different activities professionally and personally that allow me to continue to study languages and learn about linguistics and stuff like that. So, yeah.
So you're a teacher, so you
Yes.
make your living with the languages as well.
Yeah, so I teach in an elementary school and I teach in a program called French Immersion. So the kids who come to this program, they are in an English school, but all of the subjects that I teach them are in French. So they take French as a language, so they learn grammar, listening skills, speaking skills. They take math in French, so they learn how to do math in French, science, social studies, art, drama, health, all those things. All of their subjects are in French, except for one, English, obviously.
Yeah,
And then I'm the teacher who delivers all of the content in French. So I teach grade 3, grade 4 this year. I have a split grade. So yeah.
yeah. Okay. Uh, can you reveal like how old are you or like the birth year, if that's
Oh,
okay?
yeah. I
Yeah.
I was born in 1991, so
91?
I'm
Okay.
I'm 33 years old. Yeah,
Yeah. I,
and
I was born in 1990, so one
oh,
one year older.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've lived my whole life here in Southern Ontario. I've done a lot of traveling, but I've lived here
Oh wow.
almost
Born and
most of
raised
it.
in the same city.
Not exactly the same city, pretty close. I was born in a city near Toronto called Brampton, and then now I live about 40 minutes from there. But I still go back to my hometown. I'm still in touch with people from there. So kind of grew up in the same region and have lived in the same region for my entire life.
Brampton. How many people live in Brampton?
Um, I want to say like 600,000 people live in Brampton. I'm
Yeah.
not 100% sure. Um, the way Canada, I don't know if it's similar to Finland, but the way Canada is kind of structured population wise, like we have a big city and then you have like cities around it, and then there's a lot of nothing. So we have Toronto, and then you have the cities that surround Toronto, like Brampton, Vaughan, Mississauga. And then if you keep driving outward, like there are smaller towns, but it just opens to the wilderness. So a lot of our population is really close to kind of the major cities.
Yeah, and yeah, I guess in a way it's a bit similar, but I think in Canada the scale is much bigger.
Yeah.
Here in Finland, most of the cities, big cities, are in the south. Like
Okay.
if we divide Finland into like three parts, I would say all the big cities, the major cities of Finland, are in the like lower third of
Okay.
Finland. I live
Yeah.
currently in Rovaniemi, which is in Lapland,
Oh,
and
nice.
Lapland is around. It's not one third of Finland. It's a bit less, like maybe 30% of the whole area, but we only have
Okay.
120,000 people,
Hmm.
like in the whole area, and
Okay.
a bit more than half live in Rovaniemi, 67,000. So all
Yeah.
the remaining 4.8 million people live in like south of Lapland, mostly in the cities in the uh, yeah, the capital city region and some
Yeah.
other cities like Tampere, Turku.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to go to Finland. I embarrassingly, I was interested in Finland and learning Finnish at one point because
I
of
saw on your YouTube.
yeah, because of the band Nightwish. I grew up listening to Nightwish and I thought they were, have you heard of Nightwish
Oh
before? The
yeah, yeah,
band?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It was
Okay.
really big also in like when I was a child. I mean, we're in the same generation, so it was
Yeah.
really big then.
Yeah. So I like learned about this band and I saw that they were from Finland and I was like, "Oh my God, that's so cool." So I went through like a phase. I never really learned Finnish, but it was it was an interest of mine when I was younger.
Did you like Nightwish the most when they had Tarja or
Yeah.
they had
Yeah.
some, was it Norwegian or from where,
I
someone like the
oh,
singer?
the second singer, Annette, I think. Yeah, I didn't mind her.
Yeah,
But their golden age was with Taria. It was
yeah, yeah, yeah.
amazing. And then now, like, I don't know. I guess they're older. Their music doesn't really doesn't affect me the same anymore, but I don't care for kind of any of their
Yeah,
new albums. But every once in a while, you know, you're like, I want to listen to like
yeah.
Wishmaster or Once. I just want to feel the power. So yeah.
So when you were in your teenage years, you listened to their music?
Yeah. I would say I got interested in their music probably when I was like 12 or 13. So like maybe I started liking rock music or metal music as a genre when I was in grade 6 and grade 7. So that's kind of like I guess 12 or 13 years old. And then I, you know, followed them all through high school and then got to university and wasn't really didn't I don't dislike that music now. I just don't listen to it as intensely as I once did. But I really liked Nightwish.
Yeah.
I when Tauria left, I guess got fired or whatever it was. I remember following all of it online and who's going to be the new singer and
Yeah.
oh, the new singer's here. Do we like her? You know what I mean? So
It was
yeah, it
quite a
was
drama here in the like tabloids. It was like
yeah,
all the headlines on
yeah,
newspapers.
yeah.
Um, I, yeah, I know some of their like songs and I like them, but
Mhm.
I cannot remember if they had do they have any Finnish songs or is it mostly in English?
They have one Finnish song that I know of off the top of my head that was on Once, but I don't even think I know the name. I
Yeah.
can remember like there's a lyric that's like tahtien tutanut. Like I don't even know what it means. I didn't get that far in my Finnish
Yeah.
studies,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a beautiful song. And I think that's what drew me to Finnish when I was so young, even though I was a North American
Yeah.
teenager who, you know, most people in North America at that age have never even like heard of Finland. I think
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
just drawn to the sound of the language. I really enjoyed the way it sounded. Um, even just like I would, um, there used to be a website online that you could tune in to different radio stations around the world.
I
And I
know that
remember,
radio.io or something,
yeah,
radio.net. Yeah.
yeah. So sometimes when I was studying in university, I just would log on to like a random radio station, whether they were speaking
Yeah.
Finnish or Icelandic or something like that, and I would put it on the background. I would never understand anything because I haven't studied those languages, but I liked the sound of them, and the white noise was like good for concentrating. And then after a while, it becomes like embedded. You're like, I kind of want
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
learn this language. I
Yeah.
kind of think it's pretty cool. So yeah.
Yeah, I did that as well with that website, but I don't know where is it now. I tried to find it at some point, but
Yeah, everything on the internet now costs money. I remember that back in
yeah,
the day, everything was free. You could just
yeah, yeah, yeah,
listen to
yeah,
radio stations from wherever. So
yeah. And when was that? When you were listening to Finnish radio stations?
it would have been when I was in university. So like maybe around like 2010. 2011. Yeah, so I would have been 19, 20 years old at the
Yeah.
time.
And
Yeah.
around that time, you also started learning Finnish, or later?
It was later actually. I There used to be something on Twitter called Lang Jam, and Lang Jam was kind of like a competition where if you signed up for the program, you would get assigned like a random language, and then over the course of 48 hours, you would try and learn as much of that language as you can. So I've always really enjoyed dabbling in languages. Like I am not a I'm not somebody who sticks with one language for a long time. I only have a couple where I've really done that. I really
Yeah.
like just like learning and then kind of like taking a break. So I got assigned Finnish that year for that Lang Jam for that competition, and I was like, amazing. Like
Yeah.
I have been wanting to dabble in
Yeah.
it. So I did the 48 hours, and then I liked it so much that I decided like, oh, I'm gonna try doing this for like a week. So it was during COVID, we were locked down anyway, and I just studied as much Finnish as I could in that week. And then I met up with another YouTuber, and we had a little conversation in Finnish. It was a really cool experiment um, to see how much I could learn in that amount of time. Um, yeah, his name is Stefano. He's a Finnish YouTuber who studied Italian, and he was kind enough to let me test my elementary Finnish on him. So
Yeah.
it was a really
Yeah.
cool experience.
I think I've seen some of his videos as well.
Yeah,
Um, I had one question I wanted to ask. I forgot it. So
that's
let's
okay.
continue.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know why my brain froze, but there was something I wanted to. Okay, I'll ask it later. But
yeah,
so in Canada and Finland, I think in both countries, like we have some similarities in the culture, like the cold weather, ice hockey,
yeah,
and I guess Canadians know Finland better than generally other people
yeah,
because you know the World Cup in ice hockey and all the those.
yeah.
Did you do you play ice hockey, or do you follow at all, or
No, when
yeah,
I think as a Canadian child, and I'm sure it's probably the same in Finland, um, Canadian children like playing hockey is like just something that kids do. So I did play hockey growing up. I don't think I was very good at it, but you know, I enjoyed it. And then as I got older, I didn't really continue to play. I don't really watch it now, but I do know a lot of like Finnish, a lot of European players come over to North America to play in the NHL in our hockey league with the United States. But yeah, no, I don't follow it. I only follow it when we're about to win. Then I jump on the
yeah, okay,
bandwagon and I'm ready to participate in the celebrations.
yeah. But I guess everyone knows how to skate because here everyone learns when they are like 2, 3 years old.
Yeah, yeah, it's similar here. Yeah, most kids go into skating lessons and they learn how to skate, even if they
Yeah,
never play hockey.
yeah, that's one of the like basic skills. Like you start walking, you start skating, and you know. But that's quite unique because I guess there are maybe less than 10 countries where that's the case, where like skating is one of the basic skills everyone knows.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, yeah, now I remembered. I wanted to
yeah.
ask during the 48 hours when you started learning Finnish, how did you study Finnish during the 48 hours?
Um, there were two things I used. One of them actually is probably over there somewhere. My language bookshelf is over there. I'm gonna go
Yeah,
grab it. I can
yeah,
find
yeah,
it. Give me
sure,
one
sure,
second.
sure.
Okay. So when I signed up for Lang Jam and I found out I got Finnish as the language, I had been traveling in South Africa at the time, And I knew I was coming back to Canada because COVID-19 was happening, and they were starting to like close the borders and quarantine and stuff like that. But I happened to find out that I was studying Finnish when I was in a bookstore, a used bookstore, and then I found this book when I was in the
Yeah.
bookstore. It's like a pretty old, like I think it's like published in the 70s. Oh no, 93. Okay, so I guess not that old.
Yeah.
But I this is not a sponsorship. This company has never sponsored me, but I love Teach Yourself. I find that their courses are so well structured. I've used Teach Yourself for learning Afrikaans, which I have a pretty high level in. I've used it for learning Spanish this year, which 2024 was my year to study Spanish. So I used this textbook. I didn't get very far because it started to get like really complicated really quickly.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
this is chapter two, and chapter two has like a wall of
Yeah.
Finnish text, and I was like, whoa, I don't think I'm ready for that. Um, I also think I used a website that was similar to a textbook in the sense that like it had units, there was vocabulary it was teaching you, there were audio recordings that you could listen to. Um,
Was it
yeah,
50 languages? You know, they
no,
have like, oh, okay.
no, I think I don't know for sure, but it felt more like a government or like a university resource. Like I know countries like Iceland have it where when immigrants come to Iceland, they have like an online course that they can follow for free. That way they learn the language and they can get acclimatized to the country and the culture. I feel like it was something like that for Finnish, but I can't remember. It was I
Yeah.
probably have it written down somewhere in a
Yeah.
notebook.
Okay. Yeah. Well, here, at least the Finnish language courses or like teaching immigrants Finnish, it's a mess. It's a
Oh
huge
yeah.
mess. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
My wife is teaching immigrants Finnish.
okay.
Like she's not Finnish, she's Ukrainian, but she
Okay.
speaks fluently Finnish. So that's why she teaches, of course, people mainly from her country,
Okay.
the Finnish language. And she has said it's the Finnish Red Cross organizes mostly. There are a few other companies as well, but the Finnish Red Cross organizes the courses, and yeah, she has said
Yeah.
it's a mess.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably not much different in Canada. Like I don't think we do a good job here always of teaching English or teaching French, depending on what part of Canada people are immigrating to. Um, and it's almost like there are so many options, but there's no direction. You know what I mean? Like they don't
Yeah,
do a good job of setting people up to be successful. So,
yeah.
yeah.
From the 48 hours, how many hours did you actually study? What do you think?
I We were in quarantine. It
Yeah,
felt like it was like wake up, have my coffee, like let's just study Finnish. So I maybe like 8 hours a day, maybe something
yeah,
like that. In the 48 hours. And then throughout the week, like I know I was also kind of working, I was a freelance writer at the time, so I was doing kind of internet work. So maybe not as much, but I want to say maybe in total of that whole week, I might have studied 40 hours, maybe 30 hours, 35.
yeah,
I felt like, on a confidence level, I felt like I was kind of at that A1 stage. Like I could talk
yeah,
about
yeah, yeah.
myself, could talk about my family, I could talk about my life. Um, if you go back and watch the video with Stefano, like there were a couple moments where he would say something and I'd be like, I have no idea
Yeah,
what you're saying.
yeah,
But I think by and large, it was pretty successful for the amount of time. Um, but I've also been learning languages on my own for a really long time. So kind of I think knowing what it was I needed to learn,
hmm
kind of in what trajectory or what process, I think that helped kind of study the most important parts of Finnish for that challenge
yeah,
um, pretty effectively.
yeah. And if you remember about the Finnish language or like your process, what was difficult and what was easy for you in Finnish?
So I thought that the vocabulary and the pronunciation was going to be hard because Finnish is not related to Indo-European languages, and I speak mostly Indo-European languages, either natively or
Mm.
languages that I've studied. So I thought that that was going to be the hardest part, just like trying to remember words that have no relation or have very, very little relation to other vocabulary I know in other languages. But I think it's safe to say, and I don't think this is a surprise, I think the cases are the most difficult to learn.
Yeah.
Um, I I don't like them. I won't lie to you.
Yeah.
I find that also is the worst. I mean this with love. It's the worst part of German. It's the worst part of Russian. I can respect that they exist in those languages for a reason. Like I get it, I understand. But when you speak a language like English that has very little case, there's almost no case markings left in English. It's such a different way to think about it, that I find it. What does Finnish have? Like 19
15.
case,
15.
15. That's exhausting when your brain isn't trained to do that all the time, right? So I found that very difficult. I found that hard, and I think that's why after the week when I started getting out of that like basic Finnish, like hi, my name is Michael, I come from Canada, and getting into the real language, I think that's why I kind of was like, I don't know if I'm gonna keep up with this. I think I'm gonna let it go for now.
I understand because even constructing a really simple phrase might be quite difficult because if you have a phrase with only like three words,
Mhm.
then if you don't like conjugate the verbs or declinate the nouns in the correct way, then it's a huge mess.
Yeah. I feel like if I could quit my job, leave my life, and move to Finland and like really, take courses and immerse
Yeah,
myself in the language and, try and make Finnish friends semi-successfully, I feel like then I could maybe be I think that would be the best way for me to learn Finnish. But, in reality, nobody in my community speaks Finnish. Finland, as you know, Finland is 7 hours ahead of Canada, so finding time to chat might be difficult.
yeah,
Yeah, I just don't know that I would be able to reach a level of Finnish here in Canada, as easily as I could reach a high level of maybe French or Italian or another language that's spoken in my community.
yeah. I understand that. When I was a child, or not child, maybe in my teenage years, I remember I was thinking, why do I speak Finnish as a mother tongue? Because it's such a small language, only 5.5 million speakers. Why don't I speak something more useful? But now I think it changed a bit when I was an adult because I think learning languages might be I don't know if it's easier for me, but like understanding the grammar and all the structures of Finnish, I feel like most of the languages have quite
Mhm.
simple structures.
Mhm.
But still, I would say that Russian cases, even though they have just seven, sometimes I'm not sure which case to use because the
Yeah,
logic is totally different than
yeah,
in Finnish.
yeah. That's interesting because I was a young teenager in Canada, and I thought, why am I speaking English? Everybody speaks English. Like, I
Yeah,
want to speak something interesting. And I
yeah,
think that's
yeah.
kind of why I wanted to learn languages so young, and I wanted to learn so many. Like, I remember I wrote a list when I was like 13, and it had
Oh
like
wow.
30 languages. And I was like, I want to learn all of these. Obviously, as an adult, it's not, we can't, at least I can't spend all of my time studying languages, but yeah, I remember being very disappointed that like I was like, oh, I got born into English. Like everybody speaks
Yeah.
English. That's so boring. But yeah, I agree. I think it also, speaking English sometimes limits the ability for your brain to understand the structures of other languages. Um, because I see that in people I know. They have a lot of trouble trying to learn a new language because their brain doesn't think about case, or their brain doesn't think about verb conjugations, or their brain doesn't think about, grammatical gender, like whether something in French is masculine or feminine. And you have to learn that explicitly. It's not just something that your brain kind of already understands.
Yeah. Have you dabbled with any of the Inuit languages of Canada, Greenland, Alaska?
No. I have not. I've wanted to learn an indigenous language of Canada, whether it's an Inuit language or I live on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. I've wanted to learn the indigenous languages, but I also want to do it in a way that is like respectful to them, right? I don't want to just sit at home and like study it myself and keep it to myself. I would rather take a class that is, taught by an indigenous elder, somebody who actually speaks that language, who can give me the full context of their culture and their lives,
Yeah.
and their history. So I've been a little hesitant to do it by myself, but it's a goal of mine. I do want to learn an indigenous language of Canada. I just don't want to self-study it. I want to do it kind of in a class. That way, um, that way it's more authentic. It's more respectful to who those people are, I think.
Are there any classes in Canada, or do you know about the situation?
Um, where I live in Canada, in the small town that I live in, there definitely, well, I could be wrong. I don't believe that there are any in my small town, so I'd probably have to go to a bigger city like Toronto, to take a class. But even then, getting to Toronto by train here takes about 45 minutes to an hour. If I'm going to do that in the evening after work, it'd be an hour there to sit for maybe half an hour and then come back.
Yeah.
It's not very accessible. And I don't know if there are even evening classes for Indigenous languages. Like it may just
Mm,
be something that is offered at a university. And if you're a university student, you can take it, during the 9 to 5 university scheduled day, which I can't do. I'm working. So, yeah, I don't know. I'd have to dig into it, but it is a goal of mine at some point in my life. I
yeah.
do think I'd want to do that.
Yeah. I guess as a person who knows a lot about linguistics, as you are, that Inuit languages are was it synthetic? Like Finnish
Yeah.
is agglutinative, but they are like synthetic. And
Hmm.
I don't know much about those languages. I've like read some basic stuff online, but oh, the examples I've seen in
Yeah.
Greenlandic or something, like as a person who speaks an agglutinative language,
Hmm.
I think that's a whole different level. Like they have one word which is a like huge sentence, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God, it would take forever to learn that. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I actually heard that there are much less like roots of words, like you just then
Okay.
combine, and so in a way it might be easier, but
Yeah.
yeah, they seem quite difficult.
Yeah. 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 I created a video about that on TikTok about how those languages build on the root words and you can add more prefixes and suffixes. Because I don't know if it's the same in Finland, but there's like a rumor in North America, like, oh, the Inuit people have like 100 words for snow or 1,000 words for snow, like that falls from the sky. And it's like, well, yes, but no, because you can take that root word and you can modify it in so many different ways that like it kind of is the same word. It's just like adding our equivalent of like adjectives or like I don't know, other describing words to it.
Yeah, we also have here a saying that Finnish has, I don't know, like tens, not maybe hundreds of words
Mm,
for snow, but I've heard that in northern like Sami languages,
mm,
I guess all the Sami languages, but yeah, that Sami languages have also a lot of words, even more than Finnish language. But when I think now in Finnish, so if we are not talking about like verbs, just nouns, not
mhm.
adjectives, then for snow, I don't know, maybe five, six. I would remember myself. Maybe
Yeah.
I don't know how you would get to like 100 or even 20 or 30. Maybe
Yeah.
20 is possible, but yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. And I tried to actually ask my Northern Sami guest about the
Mhm.
words in Northern Sami, but yeah, she mentioned a few, but it would be
Yeah.
actually interesting to make a video about like with a Sami person who knows all the words related to
Yeah.
snow, or someone in Canada who speaks the like Aboriginal,
Yeah.
like Native American languages there.
Yes. Yeah.
And then if we could just go through all the words and what they mean,
Yeah.
like what kind of snow that is,
Yeah.
or that would be really interesting.
That would be really interesting.
Actually, that reminded me that in Northern Sami they have like tens of words for reindeer, because
Oh,
based on if it's a male or female and the age. I mean, a newborn, how do you say baby reindeer? Do you have a word for in it for like in
probably.
English? Well,
Yeah.
anyway, the baby reindeer, like there's a word for like newborn reindeer
Yes.
if it's 1 year old, 2 year, 3 year. But
Oh,
after 3 years, I think it's a general one.
okay.
But then also it depends on what kind of like color the reindeer has, and also like there are so many things. So
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of like calf and cow. Like a baby cow is a calf, but they have more words for that in relation to
yeah,
the age of the reindeer. Okay.
yeah. I was talking with the Sami woman who I met a few years ago. Like she's like maybe in her 70s, so she
Wow.
knows about this topic a lot. So
Hmm.
yeah, it was really interesting.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, so when you grew up, I guess you mainly spoke English with your parents, as heard English around you, or how was it?
Yeah. Yeah. So I I grew up in a family that has Italian heritage, but my dad spoke Italian, but he didn't teach my brother and I, and my mom didn't speak Italian. Well, she understands it, but she wasn't speaking it actively. So we grew up basically in a monolingual household with just English. But we'd hear like my dad talk to my nonna, my grandmother in Italian. And then all students here in school, they learn French from grade 1 to grade 9, or at least that's the way it was in the 90s when I grew
Is it
up.
is it mandatory
Yes, it's
all
mandatory.
all over Canada, or just some specific regions, states?
I think I want to say it's mandatory in all of the provinces and territories, but I'm maybe 95% sure. I could
Yeah.
be wrong, but I'm under the impression that it is, because Canada is like on the government level, we are like a bilingual country. So they try and make sure that if you're living in an English area, you get some French, and if you're living in a French area, you get some English. It On a realistic level, if you're in an English area, you take your 9 years of French, and then after that, it's over, and you never really use French again, unless you travel to Quebec, which is our French province, or New Brunswick, which also speaks French. But it's mandatory. But I wouldn't say that. I can't go to the grocery store in my hometown and speak to them in French, or go to
Yeah.
the bank and conduct my business in French. Like, it's not in practice. It's just more in legality or in government authority, I guess.
So a bit the same as here with Swedish, because
Okay.
Swedish and Finnish are both the official languages,
Okay.
and surprisingly, Finnish was the second official language, because Swedish was for a long time the only
Oh,
official language. I mean, that was during the time when we were part of the Russian Empire.
okay.
Finnish became an official language in 1890, 60s,
Hmm.
1863, I guess. And there have been debates about this issue because many people don't like that Swedish is an official language as well. But
Hmm.
I like languages, so that's not a
Yeah.
problem for me. But yeah, everyone should be able to like provide service in Swedish as well, but in practice that doesn't happen actually.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I would say the case here. You would think after 9 years of studying French, people would be able to at least have basic conversations. But
Yeah.
even some of my really good friends, I could call them on the phone and I could speak French and they would have like no idea what I'm saying. They
Yeah.
might be able to say like, "Oh, can I go to the bathroom?"
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
where is the library? Like they might
Yeah,
know
yeah,
some survival phrases, but they definitely couldn't carry on a full conversation and they probably couldn't read a book.
yeah. Yeah,
No hate toward them. They're all great people.
yeah.
It's not the culture here. I live in a very anglophone, a very English area. And there are some people who never speak any other language and they're completely fine, like they don't have to. So
Yeah. What about vice versa? So French speaking areas where people don't speak English that well.
it's a little bit of a political topic, a little bit of a touchy issue, because there are the provinces here. So Quebec is the
Yeah.
big province that speaks French, and they are trying to preserve the language and their heritage and their culture. But then English speakers move to Quebec, and because of that, Quebecers or the people who live in
Yeah.
Quebec have to learn English. So they end up speaking French with majority of their life, whether at work or at school or with their family. But then they also learn English because the rest of Canada speaks English. And they feel like, and I kind of agree with them to an extent, they feel like it's unfair that they have to be bilingual in both languages in order to function in
Yeah.
Canada, but the rest of us only need one. We only need English.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
there
Okay.
definitely is a little bit of an imbalance there. Um, and every once in a while you get into some interesting debates, some people who are really passionate about why do we have to learn French? This is silly. Canada was an English country. The French were here, but then the British won the war and blah 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 blah. So it does
Yeah.
kind of become political.
Yeah.
But in Quebec, I would say I know of people who have moved to Quebec, don't speak French at all, and they're fine. It does get sticky for government things. So, like if you need to renew your driver's license or get your health card to get health care, they only allow you to do that process in French. So, because that's like a government thing. So, if you don't speak French, it's difficult for you to do kind of those more official things in Quebec. But I don't think it makes a difference to their everyday life, other than a Quebecois citizen, you know, giving you the stink eye if you don't speak French in their
Yeah,
province.
yeah,
That's kind of they don't like it, but it's the reality. It's how it I guess works there.
yeah. Do you know, is it mainly in the cities? Because I just checked. Quebec is like around million square kilometers bigger than Finland. So it's
Yeah,
like around five times the size of Finland.
yeah,
So I guess there are also areas where no one lives.
yeah. Well, and there's also in the far north. I think it's Inuvik. I can't be sure. In the far north, there are the indigenous communities that speak Inuit languages. But Canada, like Finland, all of our population is kind of squished to the south of the country. So a lot of the cities in Quebec, like Montreal, the Quebec side of Ottawa, Quebec City, Trois-Rivières, those are all kind of major urban centers that have lots of French speakers. And then as you get farther north, there are a couple more like towns and cities up there, but definitely like I'd say 5 or 6 hours outside of those major cities north, there's nothing. And then you have the indigenous reserves where the indigenous peoples live, and they, I think, I'm not 100% sure, but they probably speak French there as well as potentially their own indigenous language.
Uh, yeah, you might not know about this, but um, do you know how well the indigenous population in Canada has preserved their language? Because here in Finland, the Sami people, like the generations who were born like before the 70s, they were like prohibited to speak their own language, and they were sent to boarding schools, and they were like punished for speaking their language. So
Hmm.
a lot of
Very
the
similar.
people have lost their language, but now it
Yeah.
has gotten much better. Do you know anything about this topic or?
Yeah, it's actually very similar here in Canada. So we had residential schools. I think the last residential school, so those boarding schools you had mentioned, I think the last one closed in like 1996 or 1994.
Yeah.
So in my lifetime, which is kind of crazy to me because I feel like
Yeah.
I'm young. Like that doesn't seem like very long ago.
Yeah, yeah.
So a lot of the indigenous languages, I believe, are endangered, if not critically endangered now, because the indigenous children were forced off of the reserves and they were forced to go to school, learn English. They were forbidden from speaking their languages, and a lot of those languages, I think, got forgotten by students or by the children. I do think there have been some revitalization efforts, but I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know the actual statistics, but I don't get the impression that it's very spoken. I think it's concentrated to probably older speakers, elders,
Yeah.
and I know there is, research from universities whose, purpose is to document these languages in the case that they go completely extinct and there's no more speakers. So
Hmm.
yeah, definitely not widely spoken, but maybe I could be wrong, but I don't get the impression that they are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, from the nine Sami languages, Northern Sami is the biggest, which has like around 40,000 speakers. But you can
Hmm.
find podcasts, you can find like radio shows, like a lot of media and created by young people. But the second biggest, I think, only has around 1,000. And
Okay.
then it's a quite steep decrease after
Okay.
that. And the Sami languages in the Russian side, like they have almost no speakers anymore.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's also a pity that many of the indigenous languages they have almost no good like learning materials. Maybe some old books published in the 80s. I think this is the same all around the world.
Hmm.
Like mainly some old books or very scarce resources.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that it's pretty similar to the situation here. Um, yeah. I know there was a university offering, I think it was Cree. Cree is an indigenous language spoken in the West, on the prairies, like in Alberta, Saskatchewan. So there was, I think, a course being offered out there. But other than that, I don't know that there are many resources or courses that are being taught in indigenous languages.
How interested are you about different writing systems? Because like when I think about Cree, they have like the uh Australian Aboriginal syllabics, or like I
Yeah.
think they have adopted the Cree alphabet from that. So how familiar are you with different writing systems? And in Canada, when you have traveled, have you seen a lot of those signs in different
Mm,
scripts? Or I guess you have to go really far from Ontario and get back and areas where
yeah.
you live to like
I
find
mean,
them.
yeah, I would say I have a surface understanding of about how those writing systems work, but I don't know how to read them, or, I don't really know what they say. It's not really common. to see them in kind of where I live in Canada. Um, if you went to downtown Toronto, where there's lots of tourists and lots of people around, I think you might see them there. But I wonder if they're more like almost like a show. Like, oh,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
look at how great we are. We speak English and French, and we respect our indigenous peoples, and
Yeah.
blah blah blah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think that's true,
Mm.
but it's I you could probably find an indigenous sign in Toronto. This summer I traveled on Canada's west coast. I went from Calgary, which is kind of in Alberta, which is the second westernmost province, and I traveled through the Rocky Mountains to Vancouver.
Yeah.
Um, and throughout that time, we didn't really encounter too many indigenous signs. And if we did, I feel like some of them were probably just gimmicky, touristy um, stuff. I could be wrong, but that was the impression I got. Um, a lot of the way that Canada was Canada was colonized, was that indigenous peoples were pushed off of the land that the government wanted.
Yeah.
So if you really want to see an authentic reserve, or you really want to be surrounded by those indigenous languages, a lot of them are really far away from or inaccessible from like the average Canadian experience. Like in my life, unless I purposely drove to an indigenous reserve, I probably wouldn't encounter people living on the reserve in my day-to-day life. I could probably drive for hours and not find an indigenous reserve here. They
Yeah.
tend to be farther up north, and some of them are even fly-in only. Like you can't really drive to them; you have to get an airplane to go into them. So the indigenous experience, even though Canada is doing better to try and right some of the wrongs that they did, I think the indigenous experience and indigenous languages are still really removed from everyday Canadians, from their thought process and from their own lives. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe it's different for me as a teacher. Like I make it a point to teach the students about our Indigenous peoples. But I think for the average person, I don't think they encounter Indigenous languages. Um, I don't know if they encounter Indigenous peoples, and if they do, they might not clue in that, like, oh, I'm speaking to an Indigenous person.
Yeah.
I don't think it's really mainstream, as long like unless people are wanting it to be, or unless they're seeking it out.
Yeah. Um, Here, for example, around half of the Samis live in the capital city region of Finland, so
Mm-hmm.
far away from their homeland. Here from like northern Finland, Sweden, Norway. Um, and like you definitely wouldn't know if someone's a Finn or Sami.
Mm-hmm.
But how is it in Canada? Do they mostly live in their own territories, or like did you have any people with like in school with indigenous heritage who spoke maybe the language, or do most of the community live in like Nunavut or the what was it, northwest territories and other regions?
Yeah. So growing up, I don't think I knew anybody who was Indigenous. They could have been, and I just didn't know. As an adult, I have taught several Indigenous students who are in my classes, but they don't speak their Indigenous languages. I don't even think their parents speak the Indigenous languages. I also have some acquaintances, some friends who I know in my life that are Indigenous, but again, they don't speak their Indigenous language. I think it's probably more likely that people would speak their indigenous language if they lived on a reserve. And like you said, a lot of those reserves tend to be further north. Um, like Nunavut, I know the entire province of Nunavut is mostly Inuit, I believe. I could be wrong. Um, Northwest Territories, I know, has a sizable population of indigenous peoples, but I wouldn't say in southern Ontario that those indigenous languages are being spoken by the indigenous people. I could be wrong. I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think so. I don't get that impression.
Yeah. Well, I guess I just have to find someone who's an like indigenous person from Canada and ask
For sure.
about their situation, and it would be interesting to
Yeah, that'd
uh,
be really cool to watch. I
yeah,
would definitely tune into
yeah,
that.
and especially if I manage to find someone who also speaks an indigenous
Mhm.
language like Inuit language, which might be really hard to find because I guess most of the people a bit like in probably Russia with the indigenous languages there are mainly like 60, 70 years old, like the youngest ones. So
Hmm.
they might not know how to use Zoom or they, yeah. So
Yeah,
it might be a bit more
yeah,
difficult to find
yeah.
those
Yeah, I
people.
know that there are a couple TikTok accounts of people who live in the Canadian North who do speak Indigenous languages. I don't know any off the top of my head, but if I find any, I will send them along to you. Maybe we
Yeah,
can get
sure,
in touch.
sure.
Yeah,
That would be cool. And
yeah.
that's also what I'm trying to find from like um also other areas of the like Arctic Circle, like
Mm.
from like Russia. I could speak Russian to them, which is not
Hmm.
the best, but I could speak Russian and they could like teach
Yeah.
their indigenous languages because there's also really little information about those languages because most of the material might be in Russian
Hmm.
and a bit similar here in Northern Europe. Like if you want to learn some Sami languages, you probably have to know either Finnish, Norwegian, or Swedish.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, that makes
yeah,
sense. Yeah.
yeah. So in your school time, you already mentioned you learned French.
Mm.
What what other languages did you study in school?
Um, During elementary school and secondary school, high school, I studied English and French. And then when I got to university, I was ecstatic because they had all types of languages that you could study. I studied German for 2 years. I studied Italian for 4 years. I took a Persian course.
Yeah.
I I can't speak any Persian now, but I
Yeah.
took the course. It's on my transcript. And then it was also a good time because I don't know how university goes in Finland, but in Canada, you go to school from September to April, and then you have summer break. You have time off from like the middle of April until the end of August. So I also used a lot of that time to self study a lot of languages. So I learned Afrikaans during that time. I did some studying of Dutch and Danish and Spanish and Span. Which ones did I say? Now I'm getting confused. During the time where it was not school, I was able to kind of study Spanish, Russian, Danish, Afrikaans, and kind of dabble in Dutch and other languages like that. So uh, during university, I felt like I was able to just study any language I wanted. I also did a lot of dabbling. So I dabbled in
Yeah, yeah,
Finnish, dabbled in Japanese, dabbled in a cup Arabic for a small amount of time. Yeah, university was a great time to be able to kind of study languages in a course, but also in on my own.
So, in which faculty were you? Were you studying linguistics or philology or something, or did you just take language courses?
So my major was French language and linguistics. So that was in like the modern languages department. So I took linguistics courses, but the material was taught in French.
Mm,
So I kind of was able to continue learning French and grow my vocabulary and grow my competency while learning other subjects. So we did, you know, straight linguistics things. We talked about, language acquisition and sociolinguistics. We did a couple literature courses, French literature, which I didn't love, but it's okay. We still learned some things.
yeah.
Um, And then on the side, I minored in Italian, so I took my Italian courses, and then I just had kind of an open. I think I had every year probably two or three courses that weren't really going toward my major, but were language courses that I could take from time to time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of languages.
I was in heaven. I loved it.
Yeah.
If somebody, people say, "Oh, if I won the lottery, I would, move to a desert island and have a yacht and blah blah blah." I wouldn't. I would just quit my job and I would learn languages probably. That would be my dream. So,
Yeah. And you said before that at the age of 13, 14, you already were like a huge language lover. So how, because at that point you had only studied French, but I guess you already had that interest towards languages. Where did that come from? And
yeah, I think some of it came from the fact that my dad was able to speak a different language with his mother.
yeah,
Um, I remember before bed, like every night, I'd ask my dad, like, teach me some words. Like, I want to
yeah,
know some words. But he wasn't a teacher. He doesn't understand how language works, and that's
yeah,
not his
yeah,
fault. But
yeah,
lots of people just speak a language and they don't know why they say things, right? So we did that for a bit, and I tried to like learn the different pieces. But I also, the internet was kind of just exploding in the early 2000s as well, kind of like the wild west of the internet when,
yeah,
social media hadn't taken over and there was all this cool stuff that you could do. I remember well, if my dad can't teach me Italian, then I'm going to try and figure out how to do it. So I remember going on different internet forums and trying to chat with people and
yeah,
finding, little Italian tutorials on like Giuseppe's Italian
yeah,
blog, like those kinds of things. And that's how I also discovered like Russian, or sorry, that's how I also discovered German and Danish. I think it was like an early version of it might have been Babbel or like one of those programs that uses pictures to teach you words, and you could like do a free couple lessons online. And I remember doing a German one and being like completely enthralled. I thought it was so cool. And Danish, I remember like, can you help me in like Danish, and it would keep
yeah,
repeating the word and you
yeah,
just keep saying it. And then from there I tried to use different resources I could find online. Ielanguages.com. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that, but it's a website that still exists today. I follow the owner on Twitter. She's fantastic. Um, I use that website a lot, and they were just like very basic text tutorials. Like they just told you this is the English, this is the German, or
yeah.
this
I
is
think I've seen those as well.
yeah. And I remember at one point getting to German, and they said they had the word the, and then they had der, die, das, dem, den. And I'm like, why are there so many words for the?
Yeah,
Like, what's happening
yeah,
here? Because my brain didn't know that those were cases at the time.
yeah.
But yeah, so I think my love of languages kind of just came from hearing my dad speaking something else. And then I don't know, my my love for languages too has always really been married to travel. I really enjoy, I love Canada, but I really enjoy leaving Canada and going to other places and discovering other ways of life. So being, a 13, 14, 15-year-old kid, not able to travel unless my parents took me somewhere, um, learning a different language or learning something else about a different culture was like a really cool way to discover the world from my computer, from where I was at home.
Did you usually travel in Canada with your family or abroad?
A lot of Canadians where I live tend to go to the United States. So Florida is kind of a big travel destination. Every year, Canadians go to Florida for a week so that we can sit in
Yeah,
the sun and whatever. Also, the Caribbean, like Cuba, Dominican Republic, Mexico, those places, warmer places generally. But even if you're going to somewhere like Mexico or Dominican Republic, you end up staying on like a resort. You don't get to actually like leave and go speak the language with the other
Yeah.
people. So even though my parents did take us traveling, like we went to different places, it was still very much surrounded by English. Like it wasn't like we were going to Mexico City and exploring the city with my parents and trying to learn Spanish. Like it was never
Yeah.
really like that. That's
Yeah.
just kind of the vacation culture here. We don't really, most Canadians don't really go and explore the actual countries they're in if they're going to a resort. They kind of just stay on the resort and go to the beach.
Mm. Here, it's really popular to go to the Canary Islands
Mm,
or mainland Spain. There are even some Finnish schools in southern Spain, so like
oh,
I think Fuengirola at least.
okay,
So there are so many Finnish families living there that they even have schools. So
cool.
uh, yeah, and a lot of people go to the Canary Islands. So that's our like Cuba and Florida,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
I think younger people like to backpack much more, but yeah, the older ones, I think, yeah, they might go like in a group somewhere and just speak Finnish, and they have a like tour guide who speaks with the locals, and
yeah,
that's it.
yeah. That's quite the same here. I wasn't able to kind of leave North America until I was going backpacking after university. And even my parents, they 2018, which really wasn't that long ago, 7 years ago, that was the first time that my parents had left North America and gone to Italy. Like they had never gone back,
Oh wow, yeah,
even though I guess my dad had been a couple times, but even though my dad's family and my mom's family were both from Italy, um, we never went. Like my dad maybe went once or twice. My mom had never been back. Um, because I guess they were born here and grew up here in Canada, and most of their vacation was to a sunny destination. Um, but yeah, so it's not very common here either for the old people, older, well, not old people. My parents are not old, I
yeah,
guess. The older generation to really
yeah,
kind of branch out and go traveling. Whereas I feel like our generation, like the first chance I booked a ticket to South Africa with a layover in Paris, and it was like the best day of my life. I was like, this is so cool. Like there's so much that exists outside of your bubble of your everyday life. So
yeah. Did your grandparents move to Canada, like from both of your sides, like mom's and dad's side?
my mom's side was from Sicily mostly, which is the island in the
Yeah,
bottom of Italy. And they moved to the United States first. They lived in Brooklyn and then they immigrated to Canada. So my mom's side is kind of like 3 or 4 generations removed from Italy. But my dad's side, both of his parents, my nonna and my nonno, they came from Calabria and they came to Canada, I want to say in the 1930s, 1940s.
yeah.
Um, yeah. So my dad's parents are from directly from Italy, whereas my mom's, they had a little bit more space in between when they immigrated and now.
Yeah. So when you were born, I guess your dad spoke better English than Italian because
He,
he didn't go to school in Italy.
no,
Yeah.
yeah. He spoke better English than Italian. And even now, so where my dad's family is from is in Calabria, which is
Southern Italy,
southern
like
Italy.
really,
Yeah.
yeah.
So he speaks more of an Italian dialect. So and the dialect was a dialect they spoke in the 40s that got brought to Canada that I'm
Oh,
probably
okay.
sure has changed since then. So even now, when we went on our family trip, we went to Italy. When we were in Rome, my dad wasn't really able to communicate with anybody because
Yeah.
his dialect was so different from what they speak in Rome. But yet I had learned Roman Italian because went to
Yeah.
university. So I could speak to them in Rome. And then as we traveled farther south toward Calabria and Sicily, I wasn't able to understand what they were
Yeah,
saying, but
yeah.
my dad could.
Yeah.
Um, So it was really interesting because my family in Italy would talk to me and they'd be speaking their dialect, and I was like, okay, like
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
This
yeah,
they did not teach me this in school. So yeah, he speaks a dialect, and I don't I think if you speak Italian natively, you probably can understand the dialect pretty well. But I think to a second language learner like me, they sound completely different. The words are completely different. I'm not really sure. I'd have to dig into it, but
yeah. I mean, what I've heard is that most of the dialects are actually languages, but in Italy they're like classified as dialects, but most of them are definitely languages.
yeah, a lot of countries seem to do that.
Yeah,
China
here,
as well. Yeah.
oh yeah, China, yeah. Here I think it's the case with we don't have that much with dialects, but meänkieli is something they speak in northern Sweden,
Okay.
but in Finland it's classified as a Finnish dialect because it's quite similar to the dialects here in northern Finland,
Okay.
but it's so it's basically Finnish from the 1800s,
Hmm.
which started like diverging to different direction and took just much more loan words from Swedish.
Hmm.
But yeah, otherwise we don't have the same situation as like Germany, Italy,
Yeah.
China.
Yeah. It's surprising how, well, I mean, it was surprising to me how different the dialects are in other countries. So, like German, you mentioned, I found it so surprising that the German they speak in Berlin is like different from what they're speaking in Munich, is different from the
Yeah,
German in Switzerland and the German in Austria. Um, yeah, I mean, here in Canada, I've done some videos about different Canadian English differences, but I could go to the west coast of Canada and like it's really not that different. Like it's maybe little pronunciations here or there, maybe little words, but sometimes in other
yeah.
countries it feels like they're completely different languages, you
Do you
know.
have any examples about that? I think yeah, you might have like a longer explanation on your channel, but if you could mention just a few short examples like about the Canadian English and the dialects, like some words that are different in other parts of Canada.
Yeah. So I mean, words aren't really that much different, I would say, between where I live and maybe the west coast of Canada. We have kind of the same vocabulary, but the accents are slightly different. So in here in the east, technically we're categorized as East Canadians. They our A sound that comes before like an N tends to be more nasalized. So when I say things like Canada, like it kind of goes into my nasal cavity.
Mhm.
Can, Pam, family. But out west in Vancouver in British Columbia, they don't really have that nasalization. It's kind of more flat. So they say things like, oh, I can't even really reproduce it. It's really hard. I tried on
Yeah.
TikTok and everyone was like, "You're wrong. That's not how we say it." But
Yeah.
yeah, the internet can be so cruel. But they don't nasalize it, so it comes out sounding more flat, more like Canada, hand, hand. Like it's more like
Mhm.
hand, can you help me? Instead of like can you help me, which is what I would say.
Yeah.
So like can, 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 can. Like that's a little bit, I don't know. I don't even know if I'm doing it right.
Yeah.
There's also, they do some prevelar raising out west, which means that the vowels in certain words, like egg and bag, are collapsing to be the same vowel sound. So in Eastern Canada, we would say egg and bag. Like there's a difference in that sound. Egg, bag. But in the West Coast, they're collapsing those sounds so they sound more like egg, bag. Like it's the same sound in that word. Um, and it's an active change. Like not everybody's doing it. It's happening in real time. It's also happening in the northwest of the United States. So yeah, just things like that. And a lot of people don't even really realize that these differences are happening because it's really hard to be cognizant of your own accent. People
Mm,
don't even realize, and I'm sure you know this because you don't live in Canada, but Canadians say out and about.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
just how we say it. Like it's not there's nothing wrong with it. It's just our
yeah,
pronunciation. But the amount of Canadians who I get in arguments with about this being a really important part of our accent is insane. They're like,
yeah,
nope, we don't sound like that. I sound just like an American. And we're like,
yeah.
no, no, you don't.
Yeah, especially
You
with
really
those
don't.
words, it's easy to spot who's Canadian.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So yeah, those are just some small things. Um, I'm sort of right now I'm doing a series on my TikTok channel where I started in the west coast of Canada and I'm moving east. So I just finished talking about the different accents here in Ontario, and then I'm going to move to Quebec in our east coast. So
Okay.
it should be
Interesting.
pretty interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Currently, where does Canadian English take the new like slang words? Because here in Finland, it's like you probably could guess from English, but in the capital city region, also from like Arabic, Somali. So I was thinking, do you get from French, or do you start using like words or expressions from American English, or like due to the media and stuff, or
Yeah, I'd say in the past it probably was French. Um, Maybe like 40 or 50 years ago. Like I remember growing up and instead of using the word for napkin, using the word napkin, we would use the word serviette, serviette en français. So that could be like that was probably from French. Um, but I'd say now it's mostly American English. We have media in Canada, but 70% of it is from the United States anyway. So I feel like any new vocabulary that gets adopted here is from the United States. Any, I don't know, any big changes to, I don't know, slang comes from the United States mostly. There is a dialect of English being spoken in Toronto. Maybe you saw the video. It was kind of like viral on TikTok for a while, and it's the Toronto accent. I don't know if
I
that maybe
haven't
it's
I haven't seen that.
okay, maybe it was just in North America, but there is an accent in Toronto that is kind of like new. It's not really that new. It was kind of in the 70s and 80s, but it incorporates like a Jamaican patois accent with Arabic words and Somali words, and it's
Yeah,
spoken mostly by people whose background are those backgrounds, like Jamaican or Somali or Arabic. Um, and a lot of people don't believe it that the accent exists because they're like, oh, it's just made for social media and TikTok and views and whatever. But it actually is a real studied
yeah,
accent called, I think it's called multicultural Toronto English. And they have something similar in London. There's multicultural Londoning English in England where a similar thing has happened. So they've incorporated
mm,
different elements of Jamaican patois, Somali, and Arabic, and you get people who's just, for example, something I was looking at recently, they have a new pronoun. So instead of saying like I, you, we, they say mans. So they'll say mans is coming, mans is ready, mans is at the door. Like
yeah.
it's a really innovative thing that they're doing in the language that's come from, another place. But I would say that that's pretty concentrated to a specific group of people. I think if I went to the store and I said mans is ready, people would probably look at me funny. And
Yeah.
yeah, I'd probably get punched because they'd be like,
Yeah.
why are you talking like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are some innovative things happening in terms of those kinds of smaller pockets of dialects, but Canadian English as a whole, I think, is mostly impacted by what's happening in the United States, unfortunately. But I guess
Yeah.
that's just how life works.
But those slangs are mainly used by like non-Canadians or in the UK non like British people.
some of them tend to be like children of immigrants. So they're Canadians, but maybe their parents came from Jamaica or came from a country in the Middle East or Northern Africa. And then that becomes embedded sort of in their youth culture. And then, there are always people who try to fit in. Maybe if you weren't somebody from who has a Jamaican background, but you grew up in a neighborhood where there were a lot of people from that background, they might adopt that accent as well. But yeah, it's definitely not something that, like, if you visited Toronto tomorrow, I don't even think you would hear it unless you went to like a
Yeah.
neighborhood where that dialect is actually spoken.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the interesting thing I've heard, I haven't heard this myself, but in Helsinki and the capital city region, so Helsinki, Vantaa, Espoo,
Mm-hmm.
it's more like one city than three different separate cities. So
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that like Finns, like both parents are Finns, but
Mm-hmm.
they those young people who might hang out with like immigrants or um, yeah, people who have like immigrant background and who use a lot of the Arabic, Somali, maybe Persian or like mix of different loan words in Finnish, and they have even adopted like they have this certain kind of intonation.
Yeah.
So they have started speaking like that, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I might have heard some examples on TikTok a few times, maybe, but I think that's surprising that like
Mm-hmm.
native Finns have adopted this, and I'm like, I couldn't myself use
Yeah.
those words. They just don't fit my mouth if I would just say those slang words, and even the new slang words which come from English, I when I hear them, I'm like, oh my God, don't rape the Finnish language. I was just like last week in the library, and
Mm-hmm.
there was a 7, 8 year old boy who
Uh-huh.
was playing a game, and I guess all the settings were in English because there was
Mm-hmm.
the leave button, and he was saying to his friend, uh, "Mä liivaan tämän pelin." So not lähden tästä pelistä. I will leave from this game. But so the from the word leave, but
Yeah.
he made it like the first. Took the Finnish grammar, so it was like "Mä
Yeah.
liivaan,"
Yeah.
and I was like, "No,
What are
my
you doing?
my ears are bleeding. These
Yeah. Yeah.
youngsters they can't speak Finnish anymore."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I do think it's unfortunate in those situations that you have these languages that are so immense and so developed and so apt at expressing everything. Like you probably as a Finnish speaker could express just as much as I could as an English speaker. Like our languages are wealths of these knowledges, but like for a language like Finnish that is really spoken only in Finland, maybe a little bit Russia and Sweden, but to have English like berating it all the time, like I don't know. I don't like that. I think that it makes me sad to think that one day, like, I don't want English to take over. I'm already
Yeah.
upset with how much English has already taken over. Like it's way too much. But I guess that's how language changes. I do in a sense find it cool here in North America to see how English in Canada is kind of forming its own identity and changing in its own way. And I don't think it will happen in my lifetime, but it would be really cool if I could live like 500 years just to hear what my version of
Mm,
English will sound like in 500 years. Like, is it
yeah.
going to collapse with American English and become just American? Or is it going to diverge in some weird way? And maybe we'll all start talking like multicultural Toronto English and we'll all say mans is ready. Like,
Yeah.
like it would be
Yeah.
so cool to see how
Yeah.
it develops and how it changes. Um, because yeah, I don't know. I find that really cool for English, not
Mm.
necessarily for other languages. I'm like, nope, you preserve what you have. Don't let English ruin what you have. It's it's great.
Well, I don't like it, but I think it's the natural. like evolution of
Yeah.
languages. That Finnish has already adopted so many words from Swedish, Russian, Latin, and like all
Yeah.
the different languages in the past hundreds of years. So
Yeah.
it's it's always the same. Old people complaining how the young people,
Yeah,
the
right. I
youngsters
know.
cannot speak the language.
Except now at the ripe age of 33 and 34, you and I have become the old people,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
liking the change. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah,
yeah.
I was gonna say too, it'll be interesting in 500 years to hear the first like moon dialects. Like if we colonize the moon as a species or Mars, like how are they gonna speak up
Oh
there?
yeah.
Like that would be really cool. They've already done some studies about the English that has been spoken in Antarctica. So when the scientists go to Antarctica and they're isolated from the rest of the world, they've noticed that even within 6 months, their language changes, like their pronunciation kind of converges and whatever. So can you imagine being on a different planet with other people from other countries, how your language, your accent would change? Like I find that so cool. I just am sad that I'm probably born like 300 years too soon to see that happen. I'll be long
I
dead before we have a moon colony.
I guess something similar will happen in Moon than what has happened here during the colonization, like Papiamento, which is a combination of Portuguese, I think Dutch,
Hmm.
French, all of those, or like all the Creole languages, like talk
Yeah.
Pisin in Papua New Guinea, and all of those different Creole languages. Maybe it's
Mhm.
something similar.
Yeah. 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 It'll be cool when we get there.
What do you think? How long in the past could you go to be able to survive with your current language skills?
With English?
Like all of your language skills, so English and all the other languages.
Um, well, English, I think I could probably go to like just before Shakespeare, because I think Middle English tends to be where things start to get a little closer to the way we speak English now. So I think that's like the 1600s, the 1500s. Um, Maybe a little bit earlier. I don't know. Maybe because I could draw on the Germanic languages I know, like German and Dutch and Afrikaans. Um, so maybe like early Middle English I could get to. So like 1200s, 1300s. French, probably not very far. I took a French literature course in university, and they started with like the very first pieces of French literature, like Charlemagne. And I don't even remember when he was writing, but it probably was like
800s in the
800s.
yeah
Yeah, yeah.
late I think yeah late 800s.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't think I could understand that. But then again, I guess French was more similar to Latin back then,
Yeah,
and therefore more similar to Italian and Spanish. So maybe I could use all of those to figure it
yeah.
out. Um, Afrikaans, I think I'd be able to do it from the beginning because Afrikaans came from Dutch
Mm.
in the 17 and 1800s, so I'd be fine. Uh, German, I don't think I even really fully understand German today, so I think I have
Yes, yeah,
problems with it in the past as well.
yeah.
Yeah, I haven't studied German really since leaving university. No, that's untrue. Maybe since like 2016, 2017 when I made my YouTube channel. Um, yeah, so I don't think I'd be able to carry myself in the past of that one. They'd probably murder me on the spot and be like, "Who is this
Yeah,
person?" You know?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned you studied Persian. Can you read the Arabic script?
Not anymore. I did at one point. I could do it. I wrote quizzes in my Persian course where you had to actually read the instructions
Yeah.
in the Persian script and write your answers. And I did like okay in the course. It wasn't amazing, but I don't think I could anymore. Um, Yeah, even other scripts. Like I learned the Korean script. I don't think I could do that anymore. At one point, I learned Japanese. I could do katakana and hiragana. I could probably read those if I had like an hour to refresh. But I got to kanji and was like, no, thank you. So yeah, I
Yeah,
don't think I could do any Russian. I feel like I could still read, and Greek, I could probably still read. Those would be the last two different scripts that I could read still.
yeah. And currently, what goals do you have with all your target languages? Is it to improve the existing ones, or do you also want to dabble with new languages?
This year was my year for Spanish. So Spanish was a language that I never put a lot of time and energy into just because it's so similar to French and Italian. It almost felt like I already knew it. Like I didn't need to study it because if you gave me, a piece of paper with Spanish on it, I could read it and understand most of it. But this year, like I really wanted to deep dive into it. So my goal was to sort of get Spanish to like a B1 level. I think I did really well for the first 8 months of the year. And then I started back at work. We went back to school in September. So I haven't really been keeping up. But yeah, that's kind of my goal for the rest of this year. And then I try and maintain the ones that I have. So I get to speak um, French every day at school. That's one that just happens. I don't really need to put much time and effort into making time to do French. Afrikaans, I try and incorporate in my everyday life. I'm able to speak it at home with my partner from time to time. Um, Italian and German don't really get studied all that much at this stage, but I'm kind of thinking about 2025, like what language could we learn in 2025? Or am I going to try and just revive some of the dead ones?
Yeah, maybe Finnish. Maybe you have to visit Rovaniemi and come here and
Yeah, that'd be
study a
amazing.
bit
I
Finnish.
would love to. That'd be so great. Yeah. We'll see. I do like learning cold languages during the winter time.
Yeah.
There's something
Okay.
cool about learning Finnish and looking out the window when it's a blizzard outside
Yeah.
and you're like, yes, this feels like Finland. Um,
Yeah.
I find it weird to study Spanish and all the music and videos are about beaches and palm trees, and then you
Yeah.
look
Yeah.
outside and it's freezing. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And which resources and materials and methods do you use to learn all those languages currently?
I know that this will get a lot of heat in the language learning industry because a lot of people think that this method doesn't work. I like textbooks. I'm a textbook person. I like to sit down and, read the chapter, read the dialogue, learn about the grammar, get a nice like list of vocabulary, do exercises. That's kind of what I like to do. Like if I've got my notebook beside me here for Spanish, I think I'm on like unit 22 for Spanish and I'm doing the exercises. That's kind of like my preferred way to start in a language. And then after that, I really just like using comprehensive input. Um, I like to, find a Spanish video that interests me, maybe about like traveling, I don't know, a vlog or something like that, and then kind of slow down the speed and then watch it in Spanish with Spanish subtitles and really get a lot of that input to grow the vocabulary. So my strategy tends to be learning with a structured course like a textbook or maybe something online first, and then bringing in that native material so that I can get that comprehensible input, listen to the language, grow vocabulary, speak it to myself because that's how I generally roll. Speak it to myself in the shower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you feel that saying that textbooks are a good way is a bit controversial in the language learning community,
I
or
feel
what do
like
you?
people now have sort of like demonized using a textbook or grammar. Like, oh, don't worry about learning grammar. Like, it'll come to you. Just keep listening, 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 learning. I maybe that works for some people, but I actually like using textbooks. I like learning about grammar. I like, memorizing the different verb endings for, the Spanish present tense and learning the exceptions. That's something that I enjoy doing, but I know right now it's not really like there's that whole, you know, argument about, Krashen's comprehensible input versus like just sitting and doing rote memorization. I think there's a place for both. I think comprehensible input is a great way, but without the backing of grammar, without knowing the structure of the language and how to conjugate the verbs properly or how the cases work, I think it just becomes like word salad. You know what I mean? You just end up
Yeah,
saying like,
yeah.
I like go to store. Like that, I understand what you're saying, but if you don't know the grammar, then it's not gonna flow together nicely. So that's what I like textbooks for.
If you're not studying Indonesian, then probably
Yeah,
doesn't
exactly.
work. But
Yeah, yeah. Like I'm
yeah,
sure you've heard somebody speaking Finnish who like doesn't get the cases right or doesn't, can't put the sentence together perfectly. Like it doesn't need to be perfect, but you still need to be able to understand what they're trying to say. So,
I never hear that actually. I think
no.
people are too afraid of speaking Finnish before they
Oh.
are at a certain level, and also here in Finland, like foreigners also know that if they don't speak well enough, people will respond in English. I
Yes.
wouldn't do that because I'm a language learner. I know, yeah, they would want to
Yeah.
hear the answer in Finnish, but
Hmm.
a lot of people who don't understand like how it feels like, then they might just switch to English, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I actually cannot remember any situations where someone just spoke Finnish without conjugating the
Okay.
words.
Yeah, yeah. Well, then maybe they used some sort of resource that like taught them how to do that explicitly. I think that that is kind of just what, for me, textbooks do or courses online do. It just teaches me how to do that grammar sort of step by step rather than just, watching thousands of hours of a language and just hoping that it kind of enters my brain like a sponge.
I,
Um, I don't find I learn that way. Yeah.
I'm the same. I'm the same. I love grammar. I couldn't just learn and not know the rules,
Hmm.
but I know there are many people on YouTube. Maybe one of the most famous ones, Steve,
Hmm.
who always says that don't learn grammar. So,
Yeah.
but I think there are so many different types of learners, so you can't say I do like this, everyone else has to do it. But I
Yeah.
think people who don't have experience, they look up to these people and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
he did like this, I have to do the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean the issue too, and I love Lingo Steve. He's a fellow Canadian. I respect his method. I use Link. Link is one of the things that I like to use for it. Link is the program that he helped
Yeah,
create for comprehensible input. I've used it. I love it. I think it works to an extent. But I think one of the issues in the language learning industry is that a lot of people, especially when they reach a high level of success on YouTube or online, um, some of it becomes about selling products, right? So it's tricky to be like, okay, this is the only method that works. You have to do it this way or it's not going to work. When you're right, not everybody learns the same way, but also maybe the person telling you that is trying to sell you something or trying to make it appear different than what it is, you know?
yeah,
Um, yeah, like I think that there's some of that happening too. And that's going to happen with anything online. Like that's just the way it is. You're never going to get an
yeah,
impartial view of how things really are.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, on your YouTube, I noticed that we also share the hate towards flashcards.
Yes.
I've seen so many times people on Reddit or somewhere they're like, "Oh, you have to use flashcards," and I'm like, "Ah,
Yeah.
I would do
Yeah.
anything else but
I
than
know.
I
And don't get
hate."
me wrong, again, I know one of the big flashcard apps is Anki. I think Anki is fantastic. I used it. It was great. No hate. It's just not for me. I can't sit there and, this word and flip and oh, I got it wrong
Yeah.
and this word and like I find that rote learning so very boring but also demoralizing. Like I used to hate opening up Anki and seeing that I had like 300 flashcards to do. It's
Oh
like,
my God.
like, and it's always the same words I can't
Yeah.
get. You know what I mean? I find it easier. Um, the way that I like to learn vocabulary, and I kind of touched on it earlier, has to do with that comprehensible input. So, like, I'll find a video, let's say in Spanish. There's probably one in here. My notebook is right beside me. That's lucky. I'll find a video in Spanish, and then as I'm watching the video, I'll jot down words that come up in the Spanish video that I don't know, kind of like that. And then I'll write the English beside it. And then sometimes I'll go back and I'll review the word list. And then other times I just don't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, but I find it easier and more enjoyable to learn vocabulary that way rather
Mm.
than trying to create flashcards of all of the words I didn't know. And then now I have to memorize them all. And maybe the word was like super non useful. Like maybe the word was like, I don't know, like opening a reverse mortgage. Like, when am I ever going to use the word reverse mortgage in Spanish unless I move
Yeah.
to Spain? Like, it's not going
Yeah.
to happen, right?
Yeah.
So I just don't find it's very useful to do that stuff.
Yeah. Um, I still have a few questions. I've written some stuff on my paper when I went through your YouTube, and
Yeah,
I didn't have time to watch all the videos, but
that's okay.
based on the headlines, the titles, I wanted to ask something. For
Yeah.
example, you said you are not going to learn Esperanto. I wanted to ask about con languages.
Hmm.
Um, have you, did you try to learn Esperanto, and what's your opinion about like all the constructed languages?
I did try and study Esperanto, but I don't think I put very much time and energy into it. I think it was more of like an interest, like just to see what it was all about. I didn't particularly like the sound of the language, or I guess the way it was supposed to sound, because I don't think I was really hearing it. Um, and I respect people who learn con languages. I would never tell somebody. I guess that's ironic because the video literally is don't learn Esperanto. But on a serious sense,
Yeah. Yeah.
in a serious conversation, I would, if you told me right now, like, I really love Esperanto, it's my favorite language, and I believe it's really worthy, I would say you do you. You know what I mean? I just think from the viewpoint of maybe a learner who hasn't studied other languages before and Esperanto is their first language, I don't necessarily think that that is a good entry point for them. I can see the arguments for it. Like I see how people say, oh, well, it has a base in French, it has a base in Italian, it has a base in Spanish. So Esperanto could be a conduit to learn those two languages or those three languages. In my mind, if your goal is to learn those three languages, just take out the middleman. Why do you need Esperanto? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, I think as an intellectual experiment, Esperanto is cool in theory. Con languages are cool in theory. I just don't know that on a serious language learning level, it's something that I would do. And
Yeah.
that's okay. Other people don't agree. Yeah, trust me. I know people don't agree. I sometimes take heat for these opinions online and I take accountability for them. I've said what I said, you know what I mean? But at the same time, that's just how I want my language learning journey to go. Um, Even something like Duolingo having a language from Game of Thrones before it has an indigenous language of North America
Yeah.
or Sami or something. I just feel like our time and resources could go towards something else.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that was actually because David, who I actually also interviewed, he was just available to do the job. So
yeah.
I don't know if he got anything for it, but I
Yeah.
guess if there were, I think High Valerian arrived was launched when they still had the incubator on Duolingo.
Oh,
So I
okay.
think I think at that time, if there were any speakers of like native
Yeah.
indigenous languages, they probably would have been able to do it. So I guess
Yeah,
it's also about who's available to
for
do the
sure.
job.
Yeah. And I mean, as a passion project, if this person is really excited about it, like I do what you want, you know, the internet's a free place. Like we can all do anything that we want. I just think for me, that's my opinion. And I just think for somebody who's trying to maybe enter the language learning community, I think there's a certain narrative about Esperanto or other con languages that I just don't know is necessary. I don't think we need to say, well, you know, if you learn Esperanto, it's going to make learning other languages easier. Like I don't really think that's true. If you learn Esperanto and try and learn Russian, I don't think that's going to make very
Yeah,
much of a difference. If you learn Esperanto and try and learn Finnish, well, it's not going to help you. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
But if again, do what you want to do. It is what it is. It's just really it's just my opinion. It's just not something that I would think is worthwhile for me. You know,
Yeah. What about extinct languages?
like learning an extinct language or
Yeah,
one that is
yeah. Dead
like
languages, extinct languages, ancient.
I mean, those I do think have a little bit of a merit because they were once spoken languages, like Latin. If somebody wants to learn Latin, I mean, Latin is has so much history and has had so much influence on other languages. I could see why somebody would want to do that. I personally wouldn't learn Latin because I don't really have a reason to. Same with ancient Greek, ancient Norse, things like that. Sure, they were once living languages. They could, you know, intellectually help you understand how these other languages formed. Um, I think in terms of language revitalization, that could be really useful. Like we have, you know, real instances of languages that have been revived from the dead, like Hebrew, for
Yeah,
example, that was a completely extinct language, was not really being used outside of the religious context, and then was revitalized for, you know, largely societal and political reasons. But that could happen for maybe an indigenous language of Canada that is extinct, you know, that could
yeah.
happen for another indigenous language in Australia or the United States or something. So I do think there's more reason for dead languages maybe to be studied. But again, I'm not really in a position where I think I would want to study one myself.
Sure, sure. I hope all the listeners understand. I'm just asking you like to understand more, like just your
Sure.
preferences, like
Yeah.
comparing living languages, constructed languages, and extinct languages, because I think these are like the three main
Yeah.
categories.
Yeah. And I don't think there has to be a hierarchy. It's just a preference, right? Like I
Yeah,
don't think living languages are better than dead languages or are better than con languages. Um, Part of it is my opinion and part of it is also, you know, like when I create a video or a thumbnail that says don't learn Esperanto,
yeah, yeah,
it's gonna get a click. You know what I mean?
yeah,
I'm not here to sell anybody a story about how
yeah,
saintly I am. Like I know that saying a controversial topic is gonna get a reaction and you know, those of us who create content, we want to have our voices heard. So sometimes the marketing of the idea is more extreme than what my
yeah,
opinion is. And I think when
yeah,
you watch the video, you can see that. It's not really,
yeah, yeah,
I'm not really saying, you know, I hate everybody who learns Esperanto. Like
yeah,
that's
yeah,
not
yeah,
the case.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And for me, it's also I don't have motivation for other languages than like living languages, and also I mainly study big languages because I
Mm-hmm.
already speak Finnish and Estonian and Swedish, which are all quite small.
Mm-hmm.
So that's mainly I just picked the biggest ones.
Yeah.
And I think in the language community, it's a bit like frowned upon that, oh, you just learn big languages. But
Yeah.
how many small languages do I need? I'm
Yeah.
actually studying Northern Sami as well. So,
Yeah.
I and
Yeah.
I think usually people whose mother tongue is a small language
Yeah,
tend to learn or want to learn the bigger ones, and the ones who speak huge languages, English, Chinese. I don't know about Chinese speakers, but English or, for example, my wife who speaks Russian as her mother tongue, she wanted to learn Finnish, and I was like, why someone wants to
yeah,
learn Finnish? But she
yeah,
learned she speaks already a huge language, so she
yeah,
wanted to learn like the smaller ones, which seemed like maybe exotic or
yeah.
something.
I think some of it has to do with applicability, right? Like I, as an English speaker, I wanted to study Finnish because so much of my interests were wrapped up in Night Wish when I was, 15 years old. Me wanting to learn Afrikaans is because my partner, who I've been together with for 12 years, they speak Afrikaans as their home language. So I would never have studied Afrikaans seriously if I didn't have a reason to, you
Yeah,
know? And that's kind of why I think other languages that I've tried to study, such as Russian, um, I like the idea of them, but outside of the confines of my bedroom, there was really no place for it in my life. And I lost that motivation. You know what I mean? So I think if the language is applicable enough, whether big or small, like there's motivation for somebody to learn. But I agree, for people on social media to say, oh, how can you learn Spanish and German and French? Those are big languages. You need to go
yeah,
learn a dying language in the
yeah,
Arctic.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
why? Like if
Yeah.
you want to as part of your savior complex, then sure. But really, if you're not going to use it, what's the point, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was quite surprised when I found the language learning videos on YouTube maybe around 10 years ago, and when I started noticing that there are so many people, especially in the like polyglot community, where people regard Finnish as a really like the
Yeah.
holy grail, like oh your
Uh-huh.
rally language. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, this is surprising. I wouldn't have guessed that it's
Yeah.
something prestigious to
Yeah.
be able to speak Finnish. I would have never guessed, but I feel like more than in the general population, in the language learning community, especially Finnish is like something
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
exciting.
Well, and to an extent, I mean, in the polyglot community, there's a certain amount of chest puffing and trying to measure up to other people, right? I try and stay out of that. I feel confident in my own abilities, but I don't need to make a video of me speaking 12,000 languages and then
Yeah,
going to a store and speaking fluent Chinese while somebody's getting their nails done. Like, I don't feel the need to do that, but I know that some people's brand is that, right? So
yeah,
to say like, "Oh, I studied Finnish and it's the hardest language in the world," like I can see how that's alluring because it gives people that edge, that little bit of confidence.
yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think? What have been the most most difficult and the easiest languages for you, and
That
why?
I've studied so far.
Yeah,
Yeah. Afrikaans was the easiest for me to learn, um, mostly because Afrikaans, its grammar is very basic. There aren't a lot of rules. The words are very similar to English. And I had a background studying other Germanic languages like German, Dutch. The hardest language, uh, I would say it's probably a three-way tie between Finnish for the reasons we talked about.
yeah,
Um, Japanese I found very hard as well, mostly because of kanji. Again, if you're going to learn kanji, you probably need to be using flashcards, and I can't really. I'm not really into that.
yeah.
I don't know why we just can't write the whole language in katakana and hiragana, but you know what? It's not my language. Whatever. Um, I again probably gonna get somebody who's like, "How dare you?" But anyway, that's part of their culture. That's cool. I get it. And I also found Russian quite hard. Um, yeah, there were multiple reasons why I gave up on Russian, but one of them was just that its difficulty compared to my motivation was not really there. Um, I felt like I got to a stage where I could understand spoken Russian, but when it came to reading and when it came to speaking Russian, I felt very intimidated by those parts. And I think that ultimately is why I stopped studying Russian. I found it very difficult to read and to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you the only polyglot in your family, or do your parents speak like multiple languages? And did you have any siblings who were interested about languages as well?
I'm the only one who's on this level of being obsessive with languages.
Yeah.
Uh, my mom has tried to learn, Spanish, Italian here and there. I've tried to help her, but I think it's different when you're trying to help a family member. After a while, you're like, okay, just we need some space. My dad has wanted to learn like what he calls proper Italian, I guess like the Roman Italian or the Tuscan Italian. And my brother did take some French courses because here in Canada, if you speak both French and English, it kind of gives you a leg up in terms of getting a job. But yeah, other than me, my partner is bilingual, speaks Afrikaans as well. But I'm the only one, I guess, who has kind of tried to learn more than one and maintain more than one for these abstract reasons,
Yeah.
non-applicable reasons. Yeah.
What about your friend circle? Is it common in Canada to speak many languages? Do you have
Um,
friends who also speak a bunch of languages like you?
Not really. So I don't think it's necessarily common for people to kind of learn languages outside of French or English, depending on whether or not they need French for a job. Anybody who maybe speaks another language, it's probably an ancestral language, like a language they speak with their parents or at home. Like my really good friend, she's from India and her family speaks Hindi Punjabi. But other than Hindi Punjabi, I don't think she speaks any other languages other than maybe taking like French at school or Spanish at university for fun or something. Um, yeah, I she's the only friend I can think of that probably speaks a second language
Yeah.
to a high level, to a useful level.
Yeah. So, oh, you mentioned something about AI learning. Have you used AI in your own
Yes,
language learning?
yeah, I know that the robots are taking over, and I'll probably regret saying this in about 10 years, but I I think systems like ChatGPT are really good for language learning. Um, I use it even in my own practice as a teacher. Like instead of Googling like 100 most common words for the classroom, like I can just type into ChatGPT like give me a word list of the most common 100 words, or
Yeah.
take those words and put them into a story that I can print out and read with kids. Like I think AI is doing some really interesting things with language acquisition, with language education. Obviously, there's that whole question of like, well, is Chat GPT always accurate? I don't really know. From what I've seen so far, it seems accurate. But being able to log on to Chat GPT and speak Afrikaans to it and have it ask me questions back, I think it, in a way, eliminates some of the anxiety that comes with speaking with native speakers. It eliminates some of the like awkwardness of like, hi, how are you? Good, how are you?
Yeah.
And then you sit there in silence. Like I think some of that can be alleviated with AI. Also, there's an app that I've talked about called JumpSpeak, which uses like AI as well as like voice to teach a language. I think that there are some really interesting capabilities with that. I do think that kind of technology is in its infancy right now. It's still really young, but I think in 5, 10, 15 years, I think it's going to make a huge impact on the way we learn languages. Um, there'll still be space for other methods, but I think AI is going to revolutionize how we learn really in the long term.
Yeah, I totally agree But even with AI, I think there will still be space for textbooks and courses and like different resources. At
Yeah,
least I know I'm going to use a combination of like multiple different resources
for
and not,
sure. Yeah,
yeah,
that's how I feel. Yeah.
yeah. What about um yeah, I think that was all I had. So do
Hmm.
you have any final words for the listeners about something we didn't speak about or questions to me about Finland or I don't know, anything? Any final words?
Hmm. No, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. I think we covered quite a lot, which is
Yeah,
really
yeah,
good. Yeah, it's interesting. I like being able to talk to people and talk about things that, I don't get to talk with my normal friends with.
yeah, yeah,
Most
yeah.
people in my
I
life don't
understand.
really
Yeah,
care to talk about Finland or
yeah,
language learning or whether AI is going to revolutionize the industry. So it's been really cool to chat. I think we've covered some really nice topics.
yeah. Thank you, Michael, and it was really interesting hearing your story and hearing more about Canada and like having the discussion we had today.
Mhm.
And thanks for everyone who listened to us. Don't crucify Michael for some of his opinions. I think they will not
I think
be.
you can go for it. Let's have a
Okay, go
discussion.
for
I'm
it.
here for a good
Yeah,
time, not a long time.
yeah. Anyways, thank you everyone, and see you in the next episode. Bye.